When one encounters a ghost ship drifting in the open sea, they know that it will be empty, with no sign of the crew who once manned her. This means that it's all the stranger when a boat found alone on open waters has their crew mummified, like an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. Such a discovery would traumatize anyone who uncovered it, and such a mystery would perplex those who investigated it. That's why today we're going to examine the case of the mummy ghost ship and weigh up the explanations for how this corpse ended up the way it did. The Clipper Round the World Yacht Race is a biennial competition that takes paying amateur crews on one or more legs of circumnavigating the globe. There are 11 specially designed yachts in total, manned by professional skippers and additional qualified persons. This means that the 10-month journey is not for the faint of heart or sailing newbie. In fact, sailing on the oceans is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. Throughout its 20-year history, there have been 3 fatalities. The first 2 occurred on the same ship, with one crewman being knocked out whilst adjusting the main sheet, with another being knocked overboard by a wave and carried out to sea. The third was another case of man overboard, this time on a different vessel. All this is to say that even with teams of people, death can arrive from any direction. Sailing alone is pretty much a death wish. But what no one expected to happen were the events of the 31st of January 2016. The boat Ancient Exchange was on race 7 from Australia to Vietnam when they saw something bobbing on the waves. It was a smaller boat, a private yacht named Sao. It was missing the mast, which was an immediate cause for concern, and was adrift some 470 nautical miles from the shore of West Guam. This means stumbling upon it was like finding a needle in a haystack. Or perhaps it was fate. Under the bright, sunny sky, the crew of the Ancient Exchange called out to the boat and sounded horns, but no communication came back. From what could be seen, which is thankfully captured on video camera and available online, the tiny boat was in some state of dereliction. Mold had gathered on the once brimming white boat, and the ladder to climb on board had been bent and almost completely broken off. Was this also due to weathering, or had someone broken it intentionally? It leaves one to wonder, what is a scarier thing to come upon? A perfectly mint condition boat? Or a slightly battered, slightly weathered ship, which hints at something sinister waiting inside? A crewman strapped on a life jacket, took a radio, and swam the short distance to the Stoya. Upon clambering up the ladder, they gave a thumbs up to their team and began their exploration of the lower deck. But no sooner had he reached the door was he propelled backwards by a powerful stench. He knew there was a dead body on board, but it wasn't until the crew went down into the lower deck did they see a most peculiar and horrifying sight. Slumped over the moldy desk with a radio transmitter, with a walkie-talkie just out of reach of its hand, was the mummified remains of a sailor. The body had discolored and had become gray and ashy. The eyes dried up, but with the white hair and fingernails intact. Given that the person had been in an advanced state of decomposition meant that this floating coffin had been at sea for a very long time. But how long exactly? Weeks? Months? Years? There was another question, too, regarding how exactly the body was mummified, and what was the cause of death. The Ancient Exchange crew had stopped competing in the race in order to investigate the ship. But upon liaising with the Guam Coast Guard, they were told to continue on their way. There was nothing they could do. So, when the Ancient Exchange left, the mummified sailor was once again drifting alone. Later, 2 fishermen from the Philippines spotted the same ghost ship and approached. They, too, went aboard and saw the body. But they also uncovered photo albums and other personal items. In time, they would talk with authorities, which helped contribute to the investigation that was already underway. Using the boat's registration details, it was determined that the sailor was German. Needless to say, he was a long way from home. The Clipper race director notified the German embassy in London to pass on what information they could, and the embassy then informed the police, who, hundreds of miles away and on land, were able to identify the sailor and notify the next of kin. Manfred Fritz Bajerat had been missing since 2009, 7 years before the gruesome discovery of his rotting corpse. He was last seen in Mallorca, Spain, on the other side of the world. There, he had met a sailor called Dieter, who explained that Bajerat was an experienced navigator of 20 years, so the likelihood that he sailed into a storm was unlikely. This meant intake of water in the lungs or being knocked unconscious were unlikely to be the cause of death. But now that they had a name, Authorities needed to investigate whether there was a second person on board. Perhaps it had been foul play. His slumped position at the radio transmitter suggested that he was calling for Mayday. Items were discovered strewn about the cabin, which could point to a struggle, but just as easily be the result of the ship rocking. Another dead end. Subsequent autopsies of the mummified remains indicate a heart attack as the most likely explanation, which means Bajarat was minding his own business when the Grim Reaper came for him. Unable to radio his position to anyone would explain how his body had been undiscovered for 7 long years. As for what caused him to mummify, investigators reasoned that the salt water and hot temperatures were a contributing factor, despite how difficult it is to be this well preserved without human intervention. The more superstitious amongst us might wonder whether he was being watched over by a force. Yet, stranger things have happened, evidenced by the fact that the boat was able to stay afloat through any and all bad weather. Granted, the mast had broken off, but the vessel had not capsized, nor had water come on board through the open windows and door. Perhaps there was a protective force after all. But even with a name, autopsy, and scientific investigation, there were still lots of questions. Who exactly was this man, and why was he alone? It has been alleged that his own daughter is a captain of a frigate, but that does beg the question why the alarm of his missing status had not been raised sooner. As for the motivation behind his daring solo expedition, there are conflicting accounts. Most say it was a tribute to his late wife Claudia, who passed away the year before from cancer. Other reports suggest that they had separated way before this, making his dedication to her more tragic. Which story you prefer, it still means that the man did indeed die from a broken heart. No doubt all that time alone gave him pause for reflection and introspection, making it all the more likely that his wife was with him when his time came, at least in memory, if not in spirit. As for when exactly the 59-year-old German keeled over, it can't be known. Mummification can only give a rough estimation, so although it's accepted that he mummified a few weeks after dying, the question about where and when he was at the moment of death remains a complete mystery. Had his boat been knocked off course and drifted all the way from Europe, or had it been rocking back and forth in the same place all this time? It's eerie to think that of all the ships traveling through those waters during all those years, there was a grave of a ship lost at sea. The discovery was truly miraculous, so if the Clipper race yachts hadn't found him first, then it's more than likely they'd still be at sea with his fate unknown. How many more mummy ships are out there? How many more boats are adrift with corpses on board? Sailing is a popular but dangerous pastime, and the planet is mostly water, so it's fair to say that as far as horrifying discoveries go, this solemn mummy is just a drop in the ocean. Would you have climbed on board the Soya? And how many mummy ships do you think are out there? Let us know in the comments below. If you'd like us to cover more gruesome discoveries in our videos, then please leave a like, and don't forget to share this with someone who likes strange and bizarre stories. As always, be sure to subscribe to get our next video, and be careful out there on the waters. You don't know who you might bump into.